You know that old saying that spiders are more afraid of you than you are of them? Yeah, well, that's not true in my case, and my fellow arachnophobes will probably want to skip this episode altogether, because today we're talking about one of the teeniest, tiniest, creepiest, crawliest stories in the classic Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark trilogy, the one that's impossible to erase from your mind after you read it. Just like an arachnid, its small size is no indication of the fear it's capable of causing. I'm referring to the red spot, also known as the one where spiders explode out of that broad's face. Spoiler alert. The red spot shows up in the third volume of the Scary Story series, which released in 1991. And despite this being one of the most memorable stories from the entire series, it's ironically easy to forget just how short it is. It's so short that I could probably get away with just reading it off the page to you, but that would be boring, so I'm gonna flesh it out a little bit more. One morning, while a girl named Ruth was getting ready to go to school, she looked in the mirror and noticed something unusual. A big red zit had appeared on her face. This wouldn't normally be shocking to a teenager, but unlike her pimple-faced peers, Ruth had always been blessed with a nearly flawless complexion. She ran up to her mom, tears forming at the edge of her eyes, and simply pointed to the welt on her cheek. But her mom wasn't buying into the drama. She told Ruth it was a pimple and that all she had to do to get it to go away was to wash her face in the morning and night. Otherwise, just leave it alone. Ruth reluctantly followed this advice, but it was wrong. The pimple wasn't shrinking. If anything, it had doubled in size. She was really starting to feel like a freak now, and she told her mom as much. But her mom reassured her that this is something all teenagers go through. Then she suggested running a nice hot bath to open up Ruth's pores, which turned out to be a terrible idea that came out. Within seconds, dozens of baby spiders were crawling out of Ruth's face. But if you consider the original story Nightmare Fuel, the movie's adaptation of it is Nightmare Nitrous Oxide. In the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark film, Ruth is one of the friends who reads the book of scary stories that all become terribly, horribly true. Harold the Scarecrow, the enigmatic Pale Lady, and even the Big Toe's owner show up to terrorize the teenagers. If you want to hear more about those stories' very messed up origins, check out my Scary Stories playlist link in the description. The cinematic Ruth is bit by a spider, just like the Ruth in the story, only it happens after she's locked inside a haunted house and not while she's lying in bed. The bite is looking straight up disgusting, and Ruth retreats to the bathroom to try and do something about it. But her inspection reveals the horrifying truth. Inside her spider bite are spider eggs, and it's hatching season. What Ruth experiences next can be best described as living hell. Hundreds of spider hatchlings explode out of her face, and in the words of Smash Mouth, they don't stop coming. Within moments, Ruth is covered head to toe in spiders, as are the floor and walls of the bathroom. And just when she's on the brink of a complete mental breakdown, her brother comes to the rescue with a bucket of dirty mop water. Ruth is one of the book's few victims who escapes with her life, but the traumatic experience leaves her institutionalized until the end of the movie. I guess the show must not always go on. A real quick thank you to our sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace supplies their users with all the tools you need to take your business, passion project, or even hobbies to the next level. And they just introduced a new major one: Design Intelligence. This state-of-the-art AI technology leverages Squarespace's 2 decades of expertise as a market leader, enabling virtually anyone to craft a stunning, tailored website that perfectly aligns with your unique needs. Simply choose your business type and preferred color scheme, and Design Intelligence will generate a site complete with all the essential features you require. From there, you can easily customize your site using the revolutionary Fluid Engine with drag-and-drop technology that snaps to a grid, or can move freely depending on your preference. Whether you're creating music playlists, showcasing your art through galleries, or managing product sales with a robust inventory system, Squarespace has you covered. And there's much more to discover, so if you're even slightly intrigued, head over to squarespace.com/JohnSolo to start your free trial and do some tinkering free of charge. Then when you're ready to commit, use the code JohnSolo to save 10% on your first purchase. One of my favorite things about the Scary Story series is how much the author Alvin Schwartz clearly loved folklore and myth and legends. Schwartz did a ton of research for these books, and even though these stories are short and written for early readers, all of them have deep origins with long traditions. For example, last episode I talked about how The Hook, another story that Schwartz included in Volume 1, is an urban legend that resulted from real-life instances of Lover's Lane murders and was used to teach teenagers about the importance of abstinence and honoring curfew. The Red Spot is a pretty well-known urban legend with versions and elements of it showing up in a lot of American and British pop culture and storytelling. In fact, I actually remember hearing a similar story like this when I was a kid about a woman who had licked an envelope that a fly had laid eggs on, and somehow those eggs became embedded in her tongue until they hatched. I swear to God, I didn't lick a single envelope for at least a decade after hearing that story, which, like the spider bite urban legend, is a total crock of shit. One of the primary resources for research this time around was The Mexican Pet, a book of urban legends compiled by folklorist Jan Harold Brunvand, who identifies the spider bite story archetype. Brunvand says that spider bite stories usually start with a young woman getting bitten by a spider. Sometimes she's just lying in bed at home and the spider crawls across her face, but other times she's on vacation somewhere. So after the main character, who is most always female, is bitten, the next natural step is for that bite to leave a small sore. Then the small sore turns into a big boil, prompting the girl to seek out advice for how to deal with it. In The Red Spot, it was from her mom, but sometimes it's from a doctor. The story reaches its climax, its boiling point, when the bite bursts, causing more destruction than Vesuvius. But that can happen in multiple ways. It could pop on its own, like in Schwartz's story, a doctor could lance it off, or the girl may scratch it off in frantic desperation. Pick your favorite because the end result is the same. The story always ends with spiders pouring out of the girl's face. Brunvand also references a few unique twists on the story, like in one variant the spider eggs hatch on a plane ride from North Africa to London. There's the Snakes on a Plane sequel you never knew you never wanted. Now, to those of you who are worried about a spider laying eggs in your face, I've got some good news. And some bad news. The good news is that here in reality, spiders lay their eggs in sacs and cocoons, usually in places that are dark, quiet, and unlikely to be disturbed. So the exact opposite of inside someone's face. That would be like setting up your baby's nursery inside the tiger exhibit at the zoo. In other words, if a spider was dumb enough to lay eggs in your face, there's no doubt its spider friends would call Hatchling Protective Services. So why do you think this incredibly short and absurd story is so visceral and scary and unforgettable to so many people? Well, remember how I mentioned that sometimes the girl who's bitten by the spider is described as being on vacation? That may not be the case in the Scary Stories version, but Brunvand notes that more often than not, travel is an element in these stories. Then he posits a theory that I find very fascinating, that the inclusion of travel could stem from mankind's natural fear of the unknown. Why do we fear the unknown? Because the dangers that await us there. There could be monsters, new diseases, spiders that lay their eggs in our face, etc. To put it another way, deep in the human psyche, we're all afraid of leaving our bubble, getting infected, and unknowingly bringing that infection back into the bubble when we return. It's kinda hypocritical when you think about it, like we're invading foreign lands, yet we don't want foreign lands invading our bangin' bods. This natural fear is why it's never a good idea to travel to the Amazon and study spiders. Well, that and having your head blown off. This type of story speaks to a fear that we humans have of being infected or invaded by things smaller than us, things we can't even see, but that could still hurt us. And the scariest part is, this phenomenon happens all the time, only spiders are rarely to blame. Our bodies are basically apartment buildings for bacteria, viruses, and fungi, to the point where 1 to 3% of your body mass isn't even human, it's other organisms. In any human body, there are around 30 trillion human cells, but our microbiome alone houses an estimated 39 trillion microbial cells, including bacteria, viruses, and fungi that live on and inside us. Rest assured that most of your microorganisms are good and normal, but there's also no shortage of ones that can make you really sick and have horrible side effects. Swollen glands, mucus in your lungs, bowels bursting at the brim, and death, of course. And while we don't have to worry about spiders or any other bugs laying their eggs inside us, there are still venomous spiders, ticks, lice, scabies, and bedbugs that all pose a disgusting and dangerous threat to our health without the proper treatment. The worst culprit has to be the guinea worm larva, which can get into your stomach via contaminated water. Around a year later, the adult guinea worm looks for an exit site, usually in your lower leg, and creates a horrible blister as it tries to get out through your skin. When the blister bursts, it creates a painful wound that disables you physically while the worm slowly emerges over the course of 3 to 10 weeks. The only option for treatment is to wait until the worm reveals itself. Then it's wrapped around a matchstick and slowly extracted 1 painful centimeter at a time. But even this process can take days, if not weeks. True story, I watched a Ripley's Believe It or Not episode on the guinea worm when I was like 10 years old. It's almost 20 years later now, and I've never forgotten it. To be honest, I've always kind of hoped I was misremembering that episode or that I was tricked by some phony medical horror story, but I guess I was too optimistic. The good news is that since that episode aired, guinea worms have been mostly eradicated thanks to the efforts of the Carter Center and the World Health Organization. So I would say our fear of foreign things and horrible little creatures invading our bodies is pretty reasonable, along with our fears of the medical treatments we'll have to endure to cure them. But that's enough of the scientific. Let's talk about the mythic. There are some bizarre creatures from folklore that use your body as a breeding ground. Folklore and urban legends are full of stories like the red spot that touch on our fear of bodily invasion by little creatures that squirm and hatch. If you happen to be in Hungary, you've probably heard of a Liediert. And if you have, you're welcome to roast my pronunciation. You end up with a Liediert in your life through the innocent act of placing the first egg of a black hen under your arm. I know what you're thinking. John, I do that all the time, and I've never seen a Liediert. Yeah, well, you've just gotten lucky. Because legends say the Liediert, which looks kinda like a chicken, will hatch out of the egg and use you as an anchor point for its existence. In some versions, a Liediert becomes your lover, kinda like an incubus or a succubus, because it drains off your energies through sexual acts. It'll fondle you, sit on you, and sometimes suck your blood, eventually making you weak, sick, or even dead. This is easy to avoid though, you just have to tie some garlic to your bedroom doorknob. Then, once that's taken care of, the Liediert becomes your free personal assistant. Yeah, for some reason, if it can't have sex with you, it constantly asks you to give it work to do. And if it doesn't have work, it starts to go crazy. It's actually a lot like Mr. Meeseeks from Rick and Morty.
We are created to serve a singular purpose for which we will go to any lengths to fulfill! Existence is pain to a Meeseeks, Jerry!
But don't get any funny ideas, because if you assign a Liediert a task that's impossible to complete, like turning ash back into a piece of paper or helping Logan Paul build a business that doesn't turn out to be a scam, allegedly, it will get depressed and off itself. Then Logan will film it and post it on YouTube. And nothing deserves that. Now, I'll admit the Liediert does not fit perfectly into the archetype carved out by the red spot because technically you're willingly taking possession of the chicken's egg, whereas the fear stems from the unwitting or unwilling implantation. But there are surprisingly few creatures that operate this way in folklore. My guess is because even though this is a fear a lot of people share, the phenomenon it's based on doesn't actually happen all too often. Think about how changelings reflect the anxieties of new parents and something awful suddenly happening to their new baby, because it was a real problem. Babies born apparently healthy would develop cognitive or physical disabilities that made grieving parents truly believe they'd been replaced with some kind of fairykin. And there are written records from more than one time period that support this. Meanwhile, we don't have a single verified report from any doctor living in any country at any point in history that describes a patient with any kind of eggs implanted under their skin, be it chicken or arthropod. There is one very famous example from pop culture though. the Xenomorphs from Alien. Anyone who's seen those movies, or even seen them referenced, will no doubt remember the terrifying life cycle of these monsters. The larvae are implanted inside living hosts, and after a brief gestational period, will burst out of the host's chest, killing them. Then, within a few hours, the aliens have grown into their fully mature, hideous selves, ready to start the cycle all over again. That is, unless they're a fan of show tunes, in which case they might perform a musical number for their dying host to enjoy in their final moments. Just like in the Red Spot story, the main source of horror in the film is becoming a victim of this process, of being chosen as a living host. The filmmakers just cranked the horror to 11 by designing a monster that was somehow even scarier than a spider. Shout out to H.G. Giger and his weird-ass art that served as the inspiration. But there is one final component of this story that we haven't discussed yet. I've spent a lot of time focusing on the element of fear, but we can't forget about shame. One thing I noticed during my research is that stories like The Red Spot almost always feature a female victim. And I think that's because females are typically the most horrified and ashamed at the sudden appearance of red welts on their face. Think about how many times you've seen this exact storyline play out on TV and in movies. A teenage girl gets a zit right before school picture day or homecoming and spends the entire episode freaking out about it. More often than not, though, she learns in the end that acne is common and she's not the only teenager dealing with it. Maybe with the added lesson that she should wash her face once in a while. Going back to our main resource for today, Jan Harold Brunvand lists a few other examples of shame-based insertion stories, which is my academic way of describing characters with objects stuck in their butts. Yeah, a different kind of foreign invasion. The nurses and doctors watching are very familiar with these kinds of stories, because they're real. If you know someone in the medical field, you've probably heard some stories about patients with anal abnormalities.
No one wants to admit to them that they stuck something up there. Never. It's always an accident. Every proctologist story ends in the same way. It was a 1,000,000 to 1 shot, Doc.
I believe it's also a requirement that any show about doctors and nurses include a storyline like this in the first season. My personal favorite example is Scrubs, which gives us a whole montage of foreign objects along with the shameful excuses of the patients.
I fell on it.
I fell on it?
I fell on it. I was bored.
But Grey's Anatomy has also made numerous jokes like this over the course of its 700 seasons. The most famous example of all, though, has to be the legendary Lemmiwinks from South Park. I'm fairly certain that if I show more than a single frame of footage, I'll get demonetized, so I'm gonna keep this version family friendly. But basically, after Lemmiwinks is inserted into Mr. Slave, he has a whole hero's journey, where he's assisted by the spirits of other animal victims on his quest for freedom. Mr. Slave doesn't experience any of the shame that characters usually do in these urban legends, which Brunvand classifies as colorectal mouse stories, but it obviously plays off the same trope. A different but similarly shameful archetype is mentioned in another one of Brunvand's books. He calls it the stuck couple, and you can probably guess what it's about. In the PG version, two teenagers are doing some secret smooching when their braces link together. In the adult version, something similar happens, only it's the man's trouser snake trapped inside the woman's fun tunnel. Now, regardless of the context, getting caught in the act is humiliating for almost anyone. But these stories always add some scandalous revelation to make the scenario extra embarrassing. Most of the time, the woman is married and has to explain to her doctors that the man stuck inside her is not her husband, but other times the couple consists of two closeted men who have some splaining to do themselves. There's also a variant where the couple gets stuck while somewhere public, like a parked car, and the sheriff is summoned to the scene only to find out the girl involved is his daughter.
Oh, no.
One of the reasons I think all of these stories creep us out is that being a host, whether it's to a brood of spider babies or a lost gerbil or xenomorph, takes away our individual importance. It objectifies us, our humanity is stolen, and we become just another part of the life cycle for another creature. Even worse, it's a creepy, crawly one. It makes our whole lives up to that point seem pointless. Like all the challenges we'd overcome and all the plans we made for the future were for nothing. and we have no say in the matter. Even the stories we covered that don't involve monsters bursting out of your chest lead to a loss of self, because the sexual stories are intended to be reputation ruiners. And your reputation among your tribe is an important part of your identity. What's scary about the red spot isn't actually the spiders. Well, it is the spiders, but what's extra scary is the reminder that at any moment we can lose ownership of our lives. A certain percentage of that is, unfortunately, just plain bad luck, but we can avoid unnecessary risks by making smart decisions. But I'm excited to hear what you have to say about the red spot legend and the exceedingly weird rabbit hole that we went down. Hey, after today's stories, just be glad it was a rabbit hole. Let me know where you heard the story, any unique details you may know of, and some recommendations for urban legends to cover in the future in a comment down below. Until next week, my name is John Solo, and remember, John shot first.